So we have a bit of a team effort this afternoon to talk about the GDM, gestational diabetes work that we're doing. So I'm going to kick off, and then Bridget, who is the research midwife on the project, is hopefully going to take over if she arrives in time. And this is also on behalf of my two colleagues, Graham Hickman, who's Professor of Diabetes here at the University, and my clinical colleague, Robin Huda. So yeah, this is on behalf of our team really. So I will give a bit of background, and apologies for those of you that know all this, but I think it's important just to set the scene as to why we're interested in gestational diabetes. So gestational diabetes is one of the commonest medical disorders of pregnancy. It affects anywhere between about 8 to 24% of women having a pregnancy. In East London, it's towards the 20% end. So it's a really very common disorder. And we particularly see it in women of South Asian ethnicity who are overweight or obese, who are older in age, and who are inactive. And there's also a lot of genetic risk behind gestational diabetes. So we diagnose gestational diabetes typically between about 16 and 28 weeks of pregnancy through a standardised screening protocol which follows national guidance. And if a woman is diagnosed with GDM, she then has to, throughout her pregnancy, undertake very intensive self-monitoring of her blood glucose 4 times a day as a minimum. And she has to follow very strict diet and exercise advice. She might have to take metformin tablets and or insulin. And she will be coming in and out of the hospital or perhaps to a community midwife clinic, usually every couple of weeks throughout her pregnancy. So it's a very medicalised pregnancy if you have gestational diabetes, and there is a lot of review and complex decision making by a multidisciplinary antenatal diabetes team, and that would comprise somebody like myself, a diabetologist, somebody like Bridget, who's a midwife, an obstetrician, all sorts of people, and there will be a lot of kind of tricky decision making to establish certain risks of the pregnancy and manage those adequately. And the reason we do all of this is because gestational diabetes is associated with adverse risks to both the mother and child. There's maybe quite immediate things in the pregnancy like growth disorders or prematurity or complex delivery, but also in the long term we know that a woman who's had gestational diabetes is essentially a woman who's on her way to getting permanent type 2 diabetes, and up to 50% of women with gestational diabetes will develop type 2 diabetes within the next 5 to 10 years. So a lot of focus is put into the pregnancy and into the clinical decision making there. And as a result of that, it's actually a costly condition to treat. When anyone tries to study the cost effectiveness of gestational diabetes care, the care that we do is very expensive, and actually it doesn't meet standard kind of nice quality cost effectiveness thresholds. But clearly we have to do this because these are high risk pregnancies. But what we really know is that from all of these things, and the things that I've highlighted here, is that this is a very complex clinical pathway where there is lots of potential to support women better, to make our clinical pathway more efficient, to improve the experience of women going through it, and also to minimise and identify and then minimise the risks of that pregnancy much better so that we can tailor that. So just to give this a bit of a flavour, we have probably the biggest gestational diabetes service in the country. We don't know that for definite, but given all of my grey hair, I'm fairly sure it's because we're so busy in our clinics, and we see in one small hospital, part of Barts Health Trust, every Friday I see 100 women coming through our clinic with gestational diabetes. So it's a huge increasing condition of pregnancy. And we have really huge resource pressures on that system. It was a system designed for a much lower prevalence condition, and also a condition that was always thought to be very, very high risk. And we're increasingly understanding that actually there are women in that pathway who are at much lower risk, even though they've got gestational diabetes. And at the moment our care is not very well tailored to that, because we don't really know how to predict or understand those differences. And I think the biggest thing for me as a clinician in this clinic is that the experience of women going through this, however hard we try, is not great. This is a very, very medicalised pregnancy. And we think that we could do an awful lot better in terms of supporting kind of quality of life and the experience of women in the clinic. Because no pregnant woman wants to be coming and sitting in the waiting room every 2 weeks to have a blood glucose diary looked at, and then given a quick bit of advice and then sent off and asked to come back in 2 weeks' time. So there's a huge amount we could do to improve the clinical pathway. And we've got a lot already happening locally, clinically, in terms of service improvement and innovation. We are, and this is very relevant to the work that we're doing within Pambayesian, moving towards taking on a remote blood glucose monitoring system whereby women do their normal blood glucose monitoring, and then we are able to see the results remotely and then make decisions remotely and therefore avoid some clinic appointments. And that's something that we're moving towards at the moment. There's lots of new apps coming on the market about that. And we also have a lot of research going on. So what I've really just been leading up to say is what the aims of the GDM case study are is to actually look at the whole clinical pathway of women with gestational diabetes. And the overall aims really are to support how these women are monitoring their gestational diabetes, okay? And secondly, to then use that to better aid decision making in that multidisciplinary team environment. With the effect, we hope, of reducing pressure on busy clinical settings and improve the outcomes and the experience of pregnancy care. Okay. So those are the overall aims. Now, we're taking, I think there's similarities and differences to the room choice case study. We're looking really at the entire care pathway, and I'll show you the key points within that in a minute that we're focusing on. And then Bridget's going to tell us exactly what she's doing at each point. But we're doing this in a number of ways. We're firstly, a large part of the work is looking at quantitative data from routine care. So we are extracting routine clinical data from our clinical systems to be able to inform us about women passing through this entire pathway, and that we're trying to do that at quite large scale. And then we're doing some qualitative data collection to inform how a decision support tool might improve care at particular decision nodes, and working towards the technology that we're hoping to build up within Pambayesian, how that might look and how acceptable that might be. And then Bridget and Scott and others are also looking at care pathways that exist currently in clinical guidance, and how ready is that to have some Bayesian network type decision-making tools embedded within it. So we have essentially, this is our clinical pathway. We have essentially 5 decision nodes where we think there are key junctions in this clinical pathway where we're making decisions, okay? And that's where we think that the technology from Pambayesian and Bayesian networks are going to be able to step in and support specific areas of decision making, okay? So the first decision node is who gets screened and who gets diagnosed with gestational diabetes. And that's, again, as I say, it's a standard part of a clinical pathway. But it's at the beginning of where we can begin to stratify and understand and make much more complex decisions with support from the Bayesian networks. The second decision node is, at the beginning, how high risk do we think this woman is, and what kind of care pathway can she go into? So at the moment we have 2 care pathways. We have one for women that we think are a bit higher risk and they stay having all their appointments in the hospital, and other women who we think are a bit lower risk, and we try and get them seeing their community midwife rather than coming up to the hospital every 2 weeks. But again, we don't have a great way of allocating people into one or the other. Okay, and so some decision support there is really, really valuable. The third decision node, and actually it's not a distinct time point, this would be anywhere from diagnosis to delivering a baby, is around treatment initiation. So who needs to go from diet and lifestyle change up towards metformin and or insulin? How are we making that decision? We make it largely on blood glucose self-monitoring data and scan data, ultrasound scan data of the baby. How well are we using those bits of information? A lot of that is kind of heuristic-based decision-making. How much can we do that better with the support of some Bayesian models behind it? The fourth decision node is then, when should this baby be delivered? So if a baby's been exposed to very high glucose levels from the mum, then it's quite likely the baby's going to have abnormal growth patterns in pregnancy, and it might need to be delivered early, okay? And are we good at making that decision and timing it appropriately? And then finally, I mentioned that women with gestational diabetes have this accelerated progression to type 2 diabetes. All women at about 12 weeks past delivery are offered screening to kind of begin to stratify that risk and when they might develop their type 2 diabetes. How can we, but we have no real kind of prediction actually at the moment. It's a fairly kind of messy point. How well can we begin to predict those, that progression in this decision node, again using the basal support. So those 5 decision nodes, it's a fairly ambitious kind of approach to the project, but essentially if we can support decision making at those 5 decision nodes, we have a real potential to change the entire clinical pathway and to begin to improve it, coupled with technology plus the Bayesian networks. So that's kind of our aim.